When you are more of a cult series of games, the spin-offs are usually the black sheep. There are really only two spin-offs for the Onimusha series, those being Blade Warriors and Tactics. Blade Warriors will be another time, but today we are going to be looking at Onimusha Tactics from GBA. There's not a lot of interesting information about Onimusha Tactics. It was released in 2003, developed by Capcom and published by Capcom. It was a spin-off of the game series that was originally a spin-off of the Resident Evil series. And when I say spin-off, I mean by, as you know, people would say, oh, Dino Crisis was Resident Evil with dinosaurs. Onimusha was a spin-off in the sense it was Resident Evil with a samurai. The storyline is its own world. To put it short and sweet, according to game facts, in Onimusha Tactics you play as Onimaru, a young ogre clan warrior on a quest to defeat Nobunaga and his Gamma armies. You must call upon your demon powers and sword-like skills to fight against Nobunaga's evil legions. It also contains quite a few characters who are from the regular series, such as Mahuichi, aka Kataro, and so on. I'm not the biggest fan of this series, well, its storyline, and it doesn't really give any more reason to care about plot than any other Onimusha game. You play it for, you know, the gameplay, the solid, tight, hack and slash kind of gameplay if you're playing on the console. Graphics look okay for a 2003 handheld game. It's not going to make Final Fantasy Tactics Advance look obsolete, but it still looks pretty good for what it is. With this kind of grid-based RPG game and limitations of the GBA, I think the Final Fantasy Tactics Advance or Tactics Ogre engine works pretty well. Where it stands out is the art. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance had more of a childish storybook to it. Tactics Ogre Knights of Lotus had more of a painting look to it, and Onimusha has a darker version to Japan's feudal era art style. Colors feel more washed out, characters have more of a battle-worn look to them, and in general, this is very much an interpretation of GBA Tactics version of the Onimusha PS2 games. My biggest problem is that in general it looks familiar to games like Tactics Ogre and the Knights of Lotus. What I mean by it is that to me it looks on screen, you know, if you took a screenshot of both games, they look very similar. It's not to the point where it looks like the same game, but they look very similar to each other. Music is decent at best. It's nothing to set the world on fire, but there are decent tracks in the game. It has a very intense battle sound to it, and for the most part, it's appropriate for what's going on. The problem is that the music feels like it's cut from the same cloth as other games. Again, it's solid, but it feels like if you put this into another game like Ogre Tactics or Tactics Ogre, where you want to call it, you can tell that it was in Onimusha Tactics instead of that game. So for Capcom, it's okay outing, but it's not going to be remembered too well over time. Play is okay at best. It does nothing really bad, but it's another decent game on a system with a lot of good games and in a genre with a lot of classics. The game is a grid-based RPG much like the aforementioned Final Fantasy Tactics Advance or Tactics Ogre the Knights of Lotus. The game does a few things different from the games I mentioned. The game, instead of having a system of buying weapons and items, you have to either have enemies drop them or make them through mastering recipes. The idea could have been good. You could have made it a new genre, survival horror grid-based RPG, where items come at a premium. The problem is that you can just go to every fight and repetitively kill enemies and get the recipes and the jewels required to make them. This makes almost every fight a big grinding fest until you have like every item you need. Certain weapons and armor can also be leveled up as well. Onimaru can now absorb souls and use them to level up weapons and armor. This could have also been unique for characters to make them their own. The problem is that the souls go through Onimaru's gauntlet, and from what I played, he's the only one who can do so. He also gets specific abilities from leveling up weapons, Well, it's the same for every time you do so for weapons. This is a nice thing that adds more mystery to what ability and what bonus you are getting with the next level up. There are a few typical features that were either taken out or changed to make Onimusha unique. The first is that you can't target a spot where there is no enemy. This rewards more of a checkerboard defending against attacks, while more of a close proximity yet ready to move tactics for healing characters. Another is where you're facing now no longer has an impact. Enemies now face you head to head with no option to change the direction of where you are facing. This is a standard option in most grid-based RPGs like Final Fantasy Tactics, where if you attacked an enemy from behind, it was more accurate and did more damage. My problem with this feature in most games is that unless you had strong pack characters in a movement like a unit, like all close packed together, there was really no reason for you to, have a guy, stray off from that pack, because that entire thing would turn into a big giant death march. Personally, it's a nice change of pace. You play more of a chess match with a turn order and defeat enemies on the board. Magic points have also been limited. Most characters can only cast 1 or 2 spells before you run out of magic points, and adds more of a risk versus reward system to casting. One other thing removed is that knowing how much damage you can do and how accurate your attacks are. This makes every move more of a crucial decision than being able to replay moves again and again, depending on, oh, I could do more damage to him than to him, so I'm gonna go off and attack him instead. Or I'm gonna change my attack from a basic attack on something that, is not so consequential to this big monster who's about to die, and if I let him live, he's just gonna start annihilate my characters, or he's gonna heal himself. My only other problem is that the controls for selecting specific tiles is weird. It's almost like it feels like you're slipping around on ice, and at times almost feels slow. This is probably the worst selection method in a grid-based RPG, and surprises me how Capcom let it slide, but not intended. So, in general, it does a lot of things to make it unique, but at the end of the day, it needed a fair bit of play testing. If it was, play tested a lot, then a fair bit more to really refine this game and really make it stand out of the whole bunch. Overall, Onimusha Tactics is probably the worst Onimusha game in the franchise, and that's not a bad thing. Onimusha Warlords is a classic. Samurai's Destiny is a good retread of the first style game. Demon Siege is a refinement of the series, and while Dawn of Dreams did overstay its welcome, it's still a good action game. Tactics has a solid tactics engine, but it lacks the polish to make it better than the average grid-based role-playing game. I had fun. It's definitely a buried treasure. I will warn you that there are buried games in the genre on the Game Boy Advance. I give it a 6.5 out of 10. If you are a fan of the genre, then definitely give it a shot. You won't find, too many things that make it, awful, or too many elements that make it, just a total piece of garbage, but there's enough unique things that you're going to look back at as okay, that kind of stood out of the bunch. I just wish it had a little bit more polish.